Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Judging 101. My name is Jeff Clark, and I'm going to be talking today about rhythmic precision, which I think is a very difficult category to talk about because a lot of people don't quite know what it is. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about not only what it is, but how it incorporates so many other categories on the show choir score sheet. To give you a little background about myself, again, my name is Jeff Clark. I have been teaching now for 22 years, and of those 22 years, 15 of those years were doing the competitive show choir thing. So I started off outside of Chicago, Illinois, and then moved back to Ohio, where I'm from, and taught for several years at Fairfield High School outside of Cincinnati, Ohio, where I had 3 competitive show choirs there and did very well in the competition world. I call myself semi-retired now, only because although I'm still teaching full-time, I do not do competitive show choir. I've kind of filled my plate with several other things, especially a lot in the musical theater world. So I am now a full-time vocal music director at Indian Hill High School outside of Cincinnati, where I do the large-scale musical production and, of course, do the choirs and do show choir stuff, but just not so competitive. And so it gives me a lot of extra time to go through and be clinicking with different show choirs throughout the area, as well as judging show choir competitions. So show choir will always be a passion of mine and a love, but now I kind of get to do it in a, again, semi-retired way where I get to enjoy it and get my show choir fix and also have many other things to enjoy about our time. So rhythmic precision is going to be what I'm talking about today. And I think probably the most important thing is we talk first and foremost about what that exactly means. So we know what rhythm is. We know that's beats. We know that's pulse. And then, of course, precision is how accurately we represent those. So yes, rhythmic precision, very generic, would be how precise you are with your rhythms. But I think going further than that, it is how you authentically replicate that on stage and what that means, especially in the show choir world. So let's kind of go back to the basics about just what happens when we do something for show choir. So usually you'll probably have your teaching going on in your choir class or extracurricular time for a show choir, and you'll be learning the notes and the rhythms. So with that rhythm and that pulse that we want to create within the initial rehearsal, I think it's really important that we find that rhythmic capability that we do for whatever style we're singing or performing and find that right off the bat. So it goes back to the director, it goes back to the piano, because chances are those are the 2 things that we're starting with learning music. Of course, if you're sight reading, excellent, keep doing that. But if you were learning something by rote and you were learning just the pulses, I think it's really important to talk through the text and make sure that not only is there a connection of, hey, this comes on beat 1 or the end of beat 2, but also where that syllabic stress falls, and also what we call the agogic accent. Fancy word, agogic, basically where what certain pulses get a little bit more extra time. It's, if you really want to get the technicality of it, we're talking about like tenuto, which is holding something for its full value, or something that's a little more clipped, almost to a staccato type of thing, instead of just everything getting its same pulse all the way through. I think that's really missed a lot, especially in the show choir world, because we're so worried about, hey, I got to make sure I sing something in tune at a certain dynamic level while I'm moving my hands and doing all these other things, and the band's playing and all these other things. But I think the pulse of it, the rhythmic pulse, really does come back to the first initial steps when we're teaching the music and when we're actually learning how that all fits together. And I think it goes back to the genre. It goes back to a little bit of the stylistic authenticity. So this is where I'm going to get a little bit into how all of this sort of intermingles to the rest of the score sheet. And I think style is definitely a part of that. So rhythmic precision would be different based on the style of music you're performing. So for instance, when you get into working with a drummer, you're going to have a whole other set of things. I'll talk about that in a second. But you're going to want to know, is this something that is a certain rock feel? Is it a steady 4 pattern where it's kind of a driving pulse, dun, 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 steady throughout the whole piece? Does it go into what we call a halftime feel, where we slow it back? Sometimes a bridge of a song will automatically sometimes have something that feels like it's in a different meter. It's still usually 4/4 time, but we feel it in 2. So we get this slow 1 and a 2 and a 1 and a 2, and how we transition that vocally as well as instrumentally. What's that going to do? If it's jazz, if it's swing, then sometimes we have things in a swing feel. So I always tell my students, if we're doing something as vocal jazz, I always say you need to have a hi-hat in your background. Hi-hat being the cymbal that claps like this, and you hear that and you hear that pulse behind it, which gives it that slower feel, which we call swing. So you want to make sure that you decipher what that style is that you're performing, and you decide how that's going to be set up from the get-go. I think a lot of times as show choir directors, we are so frantic about teaching the music and got to teach the music quick so that we can be ready for choreography, or sometimes the choreography's been taught and now we're teaching the music. And I think we're always worried about just doing that and getting it done quick. Whereas I feel like finding the pulse and finding the rhythmic feel, or finding, we call it in the pocket. If you can get in the pocket of the actual groove of what you're trying to set up and finding that, you're actually going to teach things faster instead of just notes on a page. For many reasons. One, of course, is the fact that I think it can be very boring and pedantic if we're just sitting there drilling notes and rhythms without actually realizing that there's a pulse behind it, realizing there is a message behind it. So knowing your text, knowing, again, the style, the genre of the music that you're trying to represent and what that means is really important, again, from the front end of things. I think too many times when I adjudicate show choirs, sometimes I feel like I'm talking about things that should have been done on the front end that is more a matter of preparation, which has now come to the result to what we see on stage right now, where if those things were to be done on the front end of things, then the actual performance is just putting it out there. So sometimes we have to just kind of flip back a little bit, spend a little more time on the front end of doing these things that I think will really help. And that really is the case, I think, for rhythmic precision. So chanting the text, trying to make sure that when you chant the text in the early stages, I think it's important to make sure there's also drive behind that. There needs to be the oomph. It can't just be, we're learning text and we're just going to be monotonous, blah, 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 blah. There's got to be a pulse. So there's strong and weak, and then this is strong, this is weak, da, 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 ba, da, 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 da. So even using just inflection with your voice and making sure your voice moves up and down and rises and falls with the phrases. It's almost like Shakespearean iambic pentameter in a way. It's like knowing where that falls, I think really can help. And chances are your choreographer is going to be doing that too. Sometimes they have it, ba, 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 ba. They don't always say the words, or chances are they may say the wrong words because they have so many of the songs they're teaching, they don't know the words for your particular song. But sometimes they will just be accenting and ba, 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 ba. And that's chances are, most likely, they will probably find those strong accented beats within the choreography. So if you can get ahead of that, I have a feeling that probably your choreographer will do the same thing when they teach the music and help that to accent the moves. That can also go into, totally different topic, but just so I don't forget to mention it, that can also go into your cleaning of your choreography and making sure that when you do clean your choreography, you're thinking about, the subdivision, breaking it down to smaller beats and actually going through and dancing through that whole note, dancing through that half note, or making sure that this is a big hit on one and then it comes back down and then there's another hit later on a 5 or the and a 4, to make sure that usually chances are that accent's an instrumental hit in the score. Most choreographers I know do check out the band score. They want to hear what the horns are playing, and I think it's important that those are accented, but a lot of times that goes with the rhythm, with the words too. And you can usually clean your choreography much better if you also clean your choreography to the cutoffs of the phrases. So that's where we kind of get into diction, which is, again, something else I'll talk about here in a second. And just your clips or your releases of words to go with the choreography is a great way to also help clean up the rhythmic precision of things. So let's go into a little bit about the drummer and the piano and how that also really plays a role into what we're talking about here. So I think most importantly is I think you have to make sure that the piano, whether it's the director playing it or if you have a student or another adult accompanist, that needs to be added in as soon as possible. Don't wait for final rehearsals. Don't wait for, competitions coming up. So, hey, we only have one time to do this and the drummer can only make it one day, so we'll do it then. The sooner you can incorporate a drummer, even if it's just sending them a video of the show, of what you're doing, so they get to see it, I think will really help a lot. I think a lot of times, at least in my experience, waiting to that last minute doesn't usually help anybody, and drummers will often do their own thing. They don't usually care so much about what's written on the page. No matter how many times you give them a score, they're probably going to be like, okay, I feel like it should be here. So they're probably going to just do their own thing anyways. So if they know the song or they have a reference on the front end of things, I think it's going to be easier for them to get it together quicker for you. In my opinion too, that goes back to piano and the director in the first rehearsals. So even just maintaining a steady bass note pulse, so there is if it's a driving rock beat, you have a dut, 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 a steady pulse. And if that's hard to do, if the accompanist or piano has a hard time with maintaining that pulse all the way through, then set up a metronome or set up I know a lot of marching bands use little Dr. Beat things. You hear those beep, boop, 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 beep, boop, 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 something that keeps a steady driving pulse just to make sure that things start to line up from the front end. Again, the sooner you do those things, whether the piano using that as a percussive instrument that it also is besides a stringed instrument, using that percussiveness of the piano to start driving that in, or the drummer, of course, being part of that and actually able to work that in sooner than later. Having the drummer and the pianist at a rehearsal, just a vocal rehearsal, is really helpful before you put the whole band together. So don't discount that. I would definitely bring the drummer in sooner and on the front end. And then of course, bass guitar, if you do have the bass guitar and rhythm section, the sooner you can get the piano, the bass, and the drums together, the more they can find that inner groove. All the other instruments, no offense to guitar or to the horns or synthesizer or anything else you may have, I just think that core of your rhythm section, they need to help set up that groove so the precision is there from them. And then singers, you get to do what you do, and hopefully you know that pulse, you know how that is going to be, and then you can work all the cutoffs and stuff like that, and you're just worried more about the band with the sync of the band with the choir. A quote that I really like is something that goes something along the lines of, notes create the sound, but the rests create the actual rhythmic feel. Like if you are creating the sound as a singer or as an instrumentalist, you create the note, but it's what happens between all of those notes that really creates the feel or the style of the music. That's probably choreographers say the same thing. Like choreography is not just that jazz hand or that hit that you have on a certain count. It's what you do in between those. That is the motion. That is the fluidity of the choreography. And I think that goes a lot into the singing as well. So we have to set that up and find that groove. We sometimes hear the words in the pocket. And that's, again, very similar to a drummer thing, to make sure that the sound feels like it's in the pocket. Make sure the drummer is finding that right pulse or that right rhythmic pattern. And that may be something where we need to listen to some examples of that. I've seen and heard a lot of show choirs out there where a drummer feels like they have to do a steady doon doon dat doon 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 dat doon 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 dat, and they just keep on playing it the whole way through. Maybe they throw in a fill here and there, but there's never a change in the groove, and it gets very monotonous. And sometimes they're reading from a very poorly written out drum score, which sometimes is just, hey, repeat this for the whole song. And that's where I always say, drummers, do your own thing. Don't just read the score, because chances are they'll have a better idea themselves. And if they don't have a better idea, give them tracks to listen to, give them things to do that. To tie in, if let's say we have the bass, the drums, we have a pretty good rhythmic feel for that. Let's go back to the choir and what the responsibilities are of the choir. So from the choir, I think the directors need to make sure that it's very clear with our attacks and releases of every word, every phrase, everything you do. And this is where you can tie in choreography as well. So if there's a certain move you're doing where you know that the girls or guys will release on a certain move of choreography, and that's also the T or the K or the S cutoff, try to align that. So when we hit this move, that is also our release. It'll help the precision of the singing part, and it's going to clean your choreography at the same time. So consider melding those two together as soon as you can, especially once you get choreography, and try to time those out. It's very helpful. The importance of the attacks and releases, I think, are super important too, and this goes a little bit into diction, a little bit into a different category, maybe a bit, or musicality, but you have to remember that the attack of a word that you sing has to be lined up. So a rule that we often follow is consonants go ahead of the beat. So if you have a word that has what we call a fricative, a really harsh consonant, or you have ones that have double consonants, like the word crazy. The word crazy, C and R are the two consonants. Those two consonants would come ahead of the beat. And then the vowel, it's a diphthong, so we have cre, and a, z. We want to make sure we put the C and the R before the beat. The which is the vowel we want to hold on to, on that downbeat of wherever we want to hit it. And then, of course, we slide into the diphthong at the end with the Z. So we want cr before, cr, Z, and then let it go at the end. So the word crazy has to have that fricative, crunch. Crazy, the CR has to come before the beat, and the A right on the beat. So if the word is crazy, the CR happened first, A, and then Z happens after. That initial attack first of all, the word pops so much better from a choral perspective, and it also will, again, usually add a lot more, precision to your rhythmic pulse as you're delivering your text. Another thing, again, with all the consonants and vowels, another thing that I like to use with my groups is I'll say, think of like a conveyor belt at a supermarket. The conveyor belt that goes by and your groceries are just going across, that's your vowels. That's your A, E, I, O, U, sometimes Y that goes across. And it's that dropping of the consonants that is the actual scan over the scanner, the beep, when you scan the code. So make sure, you have that nice long vowel, crazy, crazy, and then the drop in is that consonant. So make sure the vowel is always what we stay on, and then just drop in those consonants as needed. I think, again, the rhythmic precision category, it does blend into other things so often. So that's why diction, I think, is a part of it, your attacks, your releases. I also think that, again, when we go back to choreography or other parts of the score sheet, the subdivision of it and figuring out exactly where cutoffs go really will help you in your rhythm precision. So to kind of recap, it's starting from the beginning. It is working from your first day rehearsal with piano, with learning your text, learning the cutoffs, the attacks and releases, making sure the drummer knows what that is. Is it swing feel? Is it a straight rock feel? How do we understand where those are? How does it change up? Does it goes to a halftime feel at certain points? Or is it swing? Is it jazz? Are we ahead of the beat? Are we behind the beat? Working with that drummer, working with that rhythm section as soon as we can. And then, of course, as we go to more finer details of putting a show together, it's making sure the choreography lines up and making sure that you have those things that set together. And again, I think that's how show choir, and the reason why we love it so much, that's how it works. It's making that vocal and visual and production element all work together seamlessly. So I wish you all the best. Thank you so much, Damon, for asking me to do this. Happy holidays to everyone, and we'll see you again soon, maybe on the competition circuit. So take care. Thanks.